Okay, welcome back from your break.
Oh, personation paper is.
So for the last session today, Dr. Andy Kazama has joined us, and he will be going over some concepts that will help you to remember how to teach about the action potential.
Gigan Andy Kazamale the years and the perhaps then also Linju Niba or Linju Niba Tam Jebigi need that true court to so race.
So your year 3 curriculum from the ETSI curriculum includes some of the information that you will hear from Andy.
That and the Lurum Simbayo, right? Where the coach Sandy Rum Lurum Simbagi, don't sing it and go to share taken on Laya, Nitinachi to Kuyagi, Josh Koyevares.
But he will model for you how you can take some of that information and material and make it your own.
That Tela you begin is to Pechutan, they don't chisu kind of Pechutan to match it to the Susu being put to be Pechutan Korlaya, ne to scarce with that Mutuchigres.
So before the break, I went through this talk because in there was so much neuroscience information that you could ask questions about.
That and they dig it so tongue, my take Karsuma to be Tamchichlani Yoris, Tamchitik now I have to once a time J wig in its mom pushing Mutuchi, but on the touch it's and those Pechutan and do you just in the total dose.
And we made it most of the way through.
So pictures hobbies.
There's more detail in the last 4 minutes.
And they get Tame Kamashiti and this chapter Judus.
And it describes a little bit more about differences in types in the areas, the inferior temporal cortex, for instance, compared to Charles Bonnet syndrome.
That day, Nang as Sugale Pig, a church that they got such a number of Chungwa data, and a Charles Bonnet to get on the data, and it's Shenda Shura, Masuga Anna. Non-relation woman like a chong big chinchata latin to what is with shepherds to.
So something I hope we'll be able to do is to translate talks like this into Tibetan so you can use them more easily.
And
I think it's interesting that we can use real people talking about their real experiences to learn more about the background. So if you got some details out of it, very good, but I mostly wanted you to see the structure of how you could use something like this in your own classrooms.
Then they touch you by the chamber and the Yahoris, the machine by Banayan did a do teach it to the not to kind of special tongue says Lotto teaching in a degrees.
So before we move into the next phase, do you have any questions based on the content or the process we just covered to ask me?
That day and the Jima de Bumatzingola, and the Nanga to be Mutuchi data and the you draw it in the years.
Hello.
Hello, no video.
Gindola.
Oh, good.
Alingi Tioti. And the Tunange Jidoni.
Oh,
And the fusiform gyrus led Dinanola Karsa. Active charge. And don't the Kokinza in the Tony in the younger Susan.
really.
The active chair again the Karina.
His question
Chiloni
is.
input Kayomara. Chiloni input Mebayina, Tunangetone, younger race, Tunayangi Kendi, and the fusiform gyrus like the active chagores. They get on a down the Netonia younger lesson. The active chair give the Karins.
He want to know the cause of hallucination because you have mentioned about for this hallucination, especially this like facial thing, face thing, like different face structures. The fusiform gyrus is activated, it is activated. So he want to know what really causes that hallucination.
Okay. I will try to share some of, let's see, Jeremy's slides. So remember yesterday when you were looking at the different structures in the brain using MRI cron?
네, 계속 가지고게 let's 마스터 단다게 레파가 로치고로 디디디 가지고 디치요레스와 실 더퍼디 페이지던데 레페기 차시 만도 parla타요레스.
So the fusiform gyrus is an area that is specialized to communicate about faces.
단다게 포이시지세 디초 가지고 니 돈탄 데비기 니스티야마 당야 당도 주치레스.
And it actually has a map of different parts of the face that when activated, it will communicate that perception.
그때 mention가 주 동백이 차시만 나와지 다가서 근데 시집이 값을 단다기 포인트 시주기 차시만 나와양도서 살롱지요레스.
So if there's damage to that area, you won't be able to see the face. But what happens with the condition that we're talking about is that there is no input coming from the eyes to the primary visual cortex and no information coming into the fusiform gyrus. So the brain area is perfectly intact, has everything it needs to do its job. But with no signal coming from the eyes, sometimes it will just spontaneously fire. So when there's electrical activity in this area, it will produce the perception of a face. And depending on where is active, you might get an exaggerated form of the face. So even with no input from the external environment, the brain creates an image that you can experience. And it's different from imagination. You are not creatively constructing something. It's simply the area that is responsible for that vision is electrically active.
Imagination
Does that help?
Depends on it.
Any other questions very quickly?
Yes.
The Tushi Korangla yang Ombo the Manjini and Tushi and Zoina, Topo Tushi la Joral. But in the on the city, they should get on your nest.
That Topo Tushi is an agasuri.
That kind of flower. Once on sort of the Manjini and Tunan's Gash dog.
Okay. Is there any hallucination that is not depend on the sense organs?
So the hallucinations are the sensory perceptions. So the sense organs might be cut off completely, but the areas that interpret those sensory perceptions are the active ones during hallucinations.
that dagi take ups tadadi cups to the Masuka Wambo, the Chachin, the Kashago, in by Natitan, Devi, like Pig Chashi, the Salon Chibalatin, the Tangas to Chungu, Resova, the
So just as if you could stimulate the motor cortex and see movement, when you have electrical activity in the sensory perception areas, you will see or hear or experience the sensation.
That's all the Masuki Tandagita, also data that Devi, like Pig Chashi, the Kenchi by Bina, the Salon Chiba in Bina, and it could dinner chonvigi, that could not you and the shitty leggy race. His question is like topa in Tibetan topa means is many things. Some is the imagination or conceptual. Is there any kind of conceptual hallucinations? It's like
Yes.
one day differentiate things. At the moment we discussed about hallucinations that's visual or tactile or other things, but can that be just conceptual hallucinations, not depend on the other sensory organs?
So usually when you have an experience like that, we would call that an imagination. So it's more creative, and we don't call that a hallucination.
Okay. The decapsin banner casabeta, Tandaki did do capsin as a topa getinas, but a topa getinating as Zusu some de Tonsu, Sondela, and it tozo than the imagination or take its the picture tangres, and take capsin as to announce and issue picture maris.
When you construct something like that that does not make sense, we call that a delusion.
The Sansamanga Tsugi, that Karsugre. Dinner do Yomba Kanshila, Yansama, someone on a zoo, Yanko Tundra Karsugre, non-20, 20 major, 20 major in the Yorwa, Santa major in that, not delusion, young as to know it, or take us to know Marshall, the central, the two.
So some of it is just caught in the translation of different words, but we do have different ideas about when you have created a concept that doesn't make any sense. That's different from when you are experiencing something that's not present in the environment.
That thing as to get that delusions not at all that young two pages down the Tanya Cheprioris, as to some Nunami Kasugre. Some Nunami Teradochi, Tozuchi or Teta, and I am to Koini, major Terado, some Nokoatig and Tantan Kakachagiris.
And there are many psychiatric disorders that have these features as an important part of the diagnosis.
As a Sankangi, Tretenton Devi, Rota Sankangi, Tretenton Devi Capsa, and each could do with Tetalaya, Tossing with Capsa, Netoting the Chete, Deta Yanko, Chechu Yanko, Amanda Manda Deoris.
So I'm happy to support you as you continue to have these questions, but I do want us to go into our lecture that's planned for today.
Data and it's the try you to let yes, Tamana so.
Okay, so I will turn it over to Andy.
It's first I want to say a big tuk to Dawa for translating for me. And that's the end of my Tibetan vocabulary. But it's really nice to see so many of my former students in the audience, and I miss you all very much. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Andy Kazama, and I was actually born and raised in Alaska, which is probably the part of the United States that is closest to Tibet in terms of climate and lots of mountains, glaciers.
Danga ngushing me by mana ninga ya Andy Kazamasi yes na yang chisa tong salon chisa te adigi Alaska shola res ta tim by na sajeti koge ji koi tong nam shi ge tene ki shi ban ban na be dang a ju yang ko tani sa tong po tong da wi sa ji res.
So I'm a neuroscientist here at Emory, and I study things like emotion regulation and especially things like anxiety.
Ane nga tanda Emory ni tanda wangsa tsendu pa jeans ni jia di tanda ane so ka shinju chi sa zo de samyong tangzeng de tang ane nga zo samtsap jiong a chiwarwa o de ta kola ya tosi jigiyos.
And I'm super excited to learn with you today, and please stop me if you have any questions as we go.
Nahanda tanda che tsu nyam de dus ka chi ngutu jiwa chunga de ta thomsen ka chi dus ngutu jiwa ko ka chunga de ane ko shu chungu ye chongsons ne ke de ni dus chibi kaps an chwa yo ba ba na ya dus ka chi chwa ta li des.
So for today's lecture, I want to really have you connect what's going on microscopically and connect it with a larger philosophy.
Nahanda tanda zo de nga zu choton de ka su kari chi gin se na anda traveling ne la ya ane ko mi tang de kan ro chi yin tang de da de nga zu chi yong ge chi sa ge na sam le tang chi ko to chi ro wa o de ge the la ya jo kan understand me to be me ko la de shi yes.
And really one of the coolest things about studying the neuron is that when you understand the nature of the neuron, I think it gives you an insight into what it means to be human.
Ta ko wansa tesu ge ne tang de ha ko ba banas ko thapung ge ne ba la ya wansa tesu ge ne ba de ha ko je to ko le ka chi tang de ha ko yin ba na de la tin de ti ani nga so ro mi se de la ya ji kana yin dang de la ya de yin kana ro chi me ya to la peng res.
So as you're teaching your students, I think jumping back and forth between the micro and the macro will help your students see the purpose of studying something like the neuron.
Yeah, that Chisa, the Jachonsa, Sama, Pacho Shola, Java, Warwati, Chia by Bana, Jima, Chitsu, and Topusula, Topichi, Caps, and Eco Chijayati, once a Tazu, Lubjun Chiagi, and Chigubajan Sente was to Ala Pengris.
So my very first neuroscience professor, who was a really amazing individual, the very first day he told me, everything that you are happens because neurons in your brain either fire or didn't fire.
Ta ngarange once a send gigan thoma de and pe me pe kerachambuchires, Koge that Tambo de la Yashia de Karsina. Tanda Cheran, that Michi Imbagi Jimson de Tamatusate, Naturon Gilapig Nala, once at Hazuzuge, Nico that Tanta, the Matangi Chapela Rally, recent decisions.
And it's these 100 billion yeses and nos that turn into who you are.
That Tiga Kapsuku, that Tang Matang in that Tangatsu, that Turban Mambo, Ginitan de Laya, Kashikitan Kashimatang, Latendity, than the Cheran Kari, but it was Chongres.
So one of the things I keep in my office is an actual human brain, which you can see here. And I look at it and I think about it all the time, about who that person was and that all their memories and everything they represented is kind of locked in stasis, even though they're not here anymore. But this is like a monument to them.
Thank you, those Nimatapo, that day, the Mrs. Clepina, City, Cola Samatang, yes, the Kogi, that you Karichi, Watan, Karichi, what to the time at the Tandagata, Karsagureta, Nepagi, Nona, that you are what the take us immediately. And this Tambalaya, day by na. Epandi the Mitila Chasha by Banako, Vitako, monumental system by Tako, Lujuran Shindamba in Banako, Tako, Renton Hachan Chimbugi, and each race.
And I hope one day maybe my brain will be in a jar and my brain will be used to teach other people about neuroscience and get them interested in something I love.
Chichina Mambalangi, Lepatian, the Dogi Carsubrita, no chicken chudi, the mission de Laya, the Narangi, Tononchi Saran, the Dogi, the Jushi de Dalayam, Tujonchiagi, Nambachilaya, and Jirian Subaris.
All right, so let's get started with the neuron lecture. So these are some pictures just from where I grew up, just to show you the connection between Alaska and Tibet. I hiked under this glacier.
Parola and Joey
And it was really a childhood growing up in this environment that sparked my interest in biology and nature. So we have a couple of learning objectives for today. We want to be able to kind of talk about the basic organization of the nervous system. And then kind of the general role of the different types of neurons that you have in your body.
And
then go down to the macro and kind of trace the pathway of information that our neurons are using to communicate with each other.
And
what I think is really interesting is that remember that your brains are literally studying themselves right now. So for me, it's like, you have this curiosity about how your brain actually works, and maybe this will be part of your path.
Can you speak the last one? I just didn't hear. Sorry.
Sorry, that this is that understanding how this works will help you on your kind of path.
Sure.
As you understand your brain, you're kind of understanding yourself. And hopefully we'll get to the action potential, and you'll see how that mechanism relates to our own desire for balance in life. So let's start with the basics of the nervous system. I hope this is a review for you. So the brain, is this going to be part of the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system? What do you think? So I got the central?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, lunch sonda. Please answer.
CNS.
Central nervous system.
Right, good. So if we go to the peripheral nervous system, that's everything outside the brain and the spinal cord. So you have lots of nerves that are outside those two areas.
Handa ngaso tangko wansa mala ko kishan stambala ya wansa te mala ngaso lepa ton jongpa ni chagi chilo thamba imbana wansa mampu chigaro te la ngaso tangko wansa mala sigres.
So some of those nerves are working automatically to help you regulate things like your internal organs and glands.
Handa tina ne chachi kachi imbana ko geta rangu le kachi yo resro ngaso zupunam gi chiga wangpu tanga yana mimbu de ta le kachi che to rangu mon le kachi yo res.
And some of them are you have more voluntary control over, and you're moving consciously.
Ta shenda chimbana susu la ya karsa ngaso samshin te debi ro ta ngaso ge tangzin chi thia ge tinda yore ti pichashana ngaso zu kumbache ta ta tizu ge ya de la ya wansa khachi res.
And of course, everything is constantly talking to each other.
Ta te ta de che wansa ko su pansun la ya ketu imbana ya ti ta tu ne pansun la ya ta to reach res.
Remember that with every neuron connected on average to 10,000 other neurons, that means that there are more connections in your brain than there are stars in the galaxy.
This tambalaya ko the tambo mompo keshigura this tambalaya nenga suge ta parno la yo pigi ta parno wasta de gutskina la yo pigi karmali mawa chinga suge karsugure ta nga suzu puno la yo pigi wansa ka tumsinti mawa yo res.
So if it's a clear night tonight, you can look up in the sky and think about that. I do that all the time.
Da ya karsugure chiga samo namka chi tamu imbe kapsi chetsu namka la ta de te yang de kola samlo tangan de res mi imba na te tap te no chigi yes.
So we already talked about the brain and the spinal cord, but let's look at now this balance, this dynamic balance between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. I like to use active learning exercises as much as possible, and especially when I can get students moving, even better. So what I'd like you to do is to get a partner. You're going to have to stand up, and I want you to balance on one leg, and I want you to observe your partner's feet.
Can you?
So you're going to have them stand up.
Yes.
And pick a partner.
Yes.
And then stand on one leg. Balance on one leg.
That's it. So culture chase and me needing chat the yara shano chase. Shano chi do they need to stand on one leg?
Yep. Both partners are just, each person is going to balance on one leg like a stork.
Ya shano chase, chase some ya shano chase, me needing chat the and teacher chase, compachika gonna yam for 2 yam 0 chase. The Tunya Zubi Kapsa, Susugi, and Ropate la Tunyam Zunuga Nevate la ya, Taro chase.
And I want them to watch each other's ankle.
Each other's ankle. Sorry.
Ankle, the joint.
Okay. Tavi Kapsim by na me that Kampachi gonna again Chigarwa, and Chibi Kapsa. Ani tayati wata kampachik gani tunyam zugarwa kampachik gani tunyam zugi kapsa tasati karola taro chis na ropa gita kampag nga sugi tsuyorwa dela taro chis.
I'm just going to give them a second to see what they notice. What do they observe about each other's ankle? Is it just staying perfectly still, or is it wobbling around?
Do you want to let them start now?
Yeah.
then go to Roches, Taya, this is a mean check me, and that taking a long come back, Mara water, come back on Dig and then you don't say, but you can sense it over Telata, ni Canada, which you do, they give and which you tank away, Canada, which you do, tell I have to natural Chesa.
So I see a lot of people having difficulty holding their balance. That tell them they can sit down now. Yeah.
That is also which is Shuna to do, make a share. Yeah, to slam pickups, long to stay like Tunimgan de la Kali, but it is Tongodus.
So ask them what did they notice?
That George is Chesutus, J pickups, Ropatella to stab pickups, Caretona Johnsons.
Combat. Hello. Combat is see to number one in data commando.
It's difficult to balance.
Yeah, and they noticed how wobbly their leg was, but they have something in their body that is wanting to maintain balance, but it's a very dynamic process. It doesn't just stick and be frozen.
That and the cups in by now, casting the compact long book long to the something as so comes. Sagas put it papayo, your chili retina, as was a pool with chassis and that chicken co Tanyum Zuela and Besutango or that to me, demat by a couple by now. Take up Sacarsena, take up the Tunyam Chigi, Chivere in Banana, Zupuna, young Guchet on them big Ranchia, going with this.
And this idea of dynamic balance goes all the way through the nervous system, and as we'll see, all the way down to the level of the neuron.
That day comes a dynamic balance of the Dela young Gudengi Tanyam Secor, Tunyam Secor, Tunyam Degi young Guchut on them by a race for what, but Tandagi Nansati in Bina, and as Zubu Chashini Manco, ship Chaviginilla Chimbaina, and Tandagi Chaviginilla Chimbaina, near once a Chazukune Bablaya, and then Gudengi Tunyam Dio race.
So in the peripheral nervous system, we have systems that make us aroused, so they energize us, and systems that help calm us down. And this keeps us in balance.
That and the day Kasimba Sugia, Tango on Samala Nane, Asula Karayore, Sena, and chicken on Neroa, who get to chicken at Suga's footage, Trombo, Chicker Sugar, Selungu, like Dig Chiagi Chastangore, Ni Shenda Tigi, Kachiresna, Zuputu Kusumbo on Hulu de Alaya, Bassinchiris.
So I want them to think about maybe share with a partner what's kind of the scariest thing that they've ever done on purpose. So I went skydiving, and that's a good example. So like I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane with a parachute. What kinds of scary things have they done, maybe?
That's a theatre that you're just around the Ropat and Yamterwa, Lorota Yamter, and it's wrong with saying on it. Shannon Sashi to Chichura, or take another Ruchi and maintain the Jarochis, name by another, the skydiving in the Namni, Namton on the Chunachigorwa, near Chon teacher by Insta, patient, or racing by Namton on it, in my cotembu or what. Ko Namton on the Chonchonu Chela, Susu Jabloa, Chonag Duchi or a Chontu Pusha or Duchi and the chair by Ins. The Chesu Yamsin on it in the door, Nico Shannon so not so in the Canada which do you made near Ropat to the churches.
And then as they were doing that, tell them to share with each other what was going on in their body during it and then right afterwards.
That and the Chesu take to the Chivicas, Karachurchis, and Shannon so the GB cups, drippy cups, as Punala, Sonando, Canada which leg do, or tea deshijaroche, and it take a jelaya. And it did Sabaton, Chishana so did Sabi Jelaya, and is Kunana Canado Chidu Metea, Motochurches, and the Tita, and this is Europa, and Yamta, and to the churches.
So Dawa, just have them let me know when they've finished, and then maybe we'll have somebody share an example with the class.
Sure. In that reason, Narochi was asking us with Sawa Jet, and Zenana meeting Chilaya, and Co Nyamyonti.
So they do they have an example? I know. Tell them I recognize Stanzen when he was asking questions, and I remember taking him rock climbing, and that would be a good example.
And Tanda Chetuna take Colomotricini, yes, and the dinner is Tenzin, right? Tenzin.
Stanzen, yeah.
Draw down by take up some motion songs, quote and the Delaya, and so Riganlay, Duganlay, Zayachura, Guachura, what they any yam to Japanese.
So what example do they have?
A patient you would not chase, Chetuna like another day
Oh, tangin. Ngad ta shene chunju golo tulma dre de tanguje je de pe shena shibile sos.
And it take jail, yeah.
Ta ma dru de subu nalo subu rangin hinje ha ko mun de pe chakon da je jalo ya ye de jora ma tul dru de. Ani mege thal ma de se she ani subu le shinge da chi chawta.
Yeah, one was small. I had the experience of riding a horse down hills. I want to climb down. I remember my body tensed up, and I become really stiff, tend to just head up towards the backside. But once it get into a level ground, I felt my body just loosen up and feeling calm.
Perfect. That's a perfect example of the sympathetic system getting you ready to survive the horse ride and then calming you down afterwards.
Tanda de person pay about those that and the person di by na so get once tanda di once a mala thing on your chiso once a mala game as that and the gate netan tela ya tala shimbi caps nes that sunichi would put it to my courage so that you draw Russian malego or take ups that sunichi as a gorota take ups lika drapata and mal happy cups as a poor and a hello charge for what. Or do you know this Tambalaya Sugia? And Chiso wants some malata, new Chiso wants some malagi, Chilitan Devi, Neko Pitchin Bay, which is loose.
And then just show of hands, like how many of you like watching scary movies or eating really spicy food?
That and the Chitsuna Laba Chanrochis, Rochisu Laba Karichanrochis, and then Tambo de Laya, at the Yam to Shik to Wara, then Chitsunane. Temo Shena Sao Tinado Latani go series scary movie. This is 7 8 people. And then to anybody there is a color bit cuts out in the sunny like she go, yes.
More hands. So think about how weird it is that people like watching scary movies. Like, why would you want to go into a movie and watch million people dying or, you know, frightening yourself? Why would you do that?
That's some by me to do courage to go, but there's some teacher by now. ane karsu ko ta logne ta ga chi de ta shena so mi tung yo ba ta susu be de susu la ngam to che gi temu chi ta ta ni tu yo wa ta nga su tene no chi kare chi ni tu yo nas.
So we don't do it because we like the fear, because that by definition that can't be pleasant.
Ta nga su tene no chi ba de nga su shena la gawa ti da maris kachla pana ku ge chi ku ge ta nang tang gi de she gi thani she ba in ba na ko ta shena system ba la ya go chi mar wa.
We do these kind of scary things or eat spicy foods so that we push it in one direction and then it swings back the other direction. And humans really like to do that.
Ta ti on lu jin sen ka re se na chi ga demo shena cha ta wa ta chi ga khala khat cha sa ta ti chi yor wa o den de chi ya di ka re se na chi de nga so ge ta shena ta de do ge cho chi la ya pha u si ta ba de ge wa pha cho chi la pha do ti ge je la ne yang che khu rang da chi ka ta che tang gi ta tang nyam ge ne ba ba yong lo yong wa o ti na yong ge res ti sta ba la nga su mi ba na ta ko rang shin ge ti na do chi ga ga res.
So when I jumped out of the airplane to skydive and then I didn't die, I felt really great afterwards.
Ta nam ni ko chongya chi go ro nam chen ne ma chongya ti che bi kap se ani ko da ju kap se ta shen yo ro ni ma na yang ta ma te la ya ko chong ko ta chong the ne ta ma te la shi me zang ta shi yo ma ro chong yo ma ro ne ta te la te de ta ta da ge ta chi nyam nyon te la sam lo ta ba na pe ta te tu na ta dem ba chi ri dus.
So you'll see how this relates to the actual neuron in a little bit.
Ta ta da ge de nga so ani wang sa tang draw kan ro yo me de ta da chi su choose chi la thong res.
So let's just review the 3 basic types of neurons.
Da da nga so ge de la za we ge wang sa chai su la yo sum yo res de la ta gens.
So the first type is bringing information. It's connecting you to your environment through all the sensory systems that Jillian just talked about.
Da ta tam po de ka res na wang sa chai su res ta de nga so ge ko yi tan de te de ko yi ni cha chen ti zu na nang den chi ni res ti ta da nge la ya ge ji len gi mo tu na sa ta rang res.
So one of her questions was about the sensory receptors that in macular degeneration, right? That the retina was degrading.
Ta de ka sim ba na chi de ka la na nga su ga wang ta de len ba se ko wa da de ka sa se khi de wa ma su retina de thola la chim ba tin de te ane ko la ya nang den gi cha tin tin jut me pa ni ta de ja swas.
So that's a great example of a sensory neuron. And then we also have interneurons that only talk to other neurons.
Ta de nga su ge tang gi she chu de ane ko ga wang su ge wang sa che zu ke sin ya ho chi che de shen da ka re se na nga su la ya pa ni wang sa tha zi yo res pa ni wang sa tha zi de ka la na ane ko ga pa ro la ya wang sa che zu pa ro la ya do chi chi ko res.
So we take information in, we process it, and then we activate our motor neurons to reach back out and touch the world.
Da de ji kar chi gre se na nga chu cha tin ti len cha tin ti ya ma do ta ta no chi la ya cha tin ti yi se chi no chi la ya ne nga chu gu chu wang sa tha zu de la ya ne ko gu chu tong chi go res ta nga chu chi cha la la ba do ta na pa kum ba do ti gi ti cha wa de chi chi res.
So let's look at the parts of, we'll use this interneuron as an example, and I want them to go through with a partner and see if they can remember the different parts of the neuron and kind of what they do. So they'll work as a group to kind of go through these different parts. So starting with the dendrites and working all the way out to the terminal branches here.
Ta da da che zu din seng ge na ni ro wa do se da de ka na ni che zu de chi de chi de zheng ge de da da shi wa nga zu wang sa ta zu ju pa na wang sa ta zu de dang po de nga zu su lu ni gu zu shi wa ne a tu chi ta pu li do ne gu zu che ne de ge ko we cha she de nga zu ge da da len sa ten da de nga zu da ko ta ma de la ya ko ge da chi sa de ge ne no pa de yo ro wa this time ba la ya cha shi ka re ye men tang ko zu ge je le ka re ye men de che zu na ne pu de na che.
So are they going through it with them together? I can't see.
I think they're discussing.
Okay. Okay. So on this diagram, ask them if they remember what this part of it is. This part that's wrapping around the axon.
Da de kasirwa ne tanda parri chiten do remochirwa.
Do they remember what it's called?
Remote chiten shaju tige ganla ya ne ko ge karsa da che sa tingi thala ya dus ta chi drum shaju do chi doga. O te kare yemen de tingi do esa.
너 좋아디 가래 연결 sonda.
Tanda de da che sa tingi thala ya ko chi doa da che sa tingi ganla ya chi drum shaju do chi doga. Dege chashi dege minga le esa.
배트 이사래 배트
Yeah.
배트라 말해
Yeah. Island ship. And they're saying that the one that you have shown is smiling ship.
Very good. Awesome work. So as they're teaching their students, you notice how hard I'm making them work. I want them to do that with their students too.
Handa dada de kasi mai se re la ya to na chigi ta ne se so tudir chigi ko kap tegi yes che tsin ba na jima chiga lo tila lon sen tripi kap se yang tela do ko so la ya chiga dika chia ge yang ko kap te terochis.
So you want your students to come up with their own personal examples so that they can connect to the material directly, not through me or for you as the teacher.
Handa jima ko su lon sen jang be kap se ba na ya chiga pichun tila do so ge pichun tila sha chi de de jang shin be lon sen ta jawa tu ku china ya yo res ko jawa to ya de yang su gar ge nyam nyong ta nyong chola ten de jawa na ya yo res ro de yang chi tang nga ta ta ya na chi chu ge ge ji ka chi chu do ju chi do ta na an tila ya yo ma ku chu rang ge nyam ten de na ya yo res.
And have them constantly jumping around the material they've already covered and trying to put things in perspective.
Tem se ani ku chu ge la jang sha ju ge yang ju cha te ta ta an de wa chu ge ani ko paro la ya ani jawa kare me ge ne ta te mo to chigi china ya res.
So remember at the junction at the end here and the terminal branches, the information is flowing from this way all the way to the end. And what is going to happen over here? Ask them, describe what happens here.
Handa dada de kasi bana ko ge ta once ta su na ne ko ge chatin te yun sho ne ta du singa su system mudi ga ta bana yun sho ne sho de la do wa sho de la do de tan ko ge ta ne de la le bi kap se ta ko ge ni su ta na chatin de la ya karin jung re es ni chwa de tris. Chatting te once ta na da chi chatting ge ni la le pick up se karin jong re sa.
렌 잡으시고
what's a 템번 좋아 이사래
Ta de la le pick up.
제다
템버
Signals turn into signals. Simon saying turn into chemical signal.
Perfect. So everything in here is electrical, right? And the amazing thing is that your brain is running on about the same amount of electricity as a fluorescent light bulb.
Tata de kapsa ngasuge tigina la ta once tries na la ku na ro ni lo la is lo de ro ani lo de ta chitange ngasuge de la ya 고야게 로치 거로다 되게 나나 옆에 로팅 나서 남진게 셰토 로치 거로다 배체 플로레센트 삼스 어때게 로틸라 코위게다 로치 거로와 어때나 로치 배치 당대 되네 레피리 카치기요레스.
So it's amazing to think that we have this supercomputer between our ears that is all powered, you know, the same voltage as a fluorescent light bulb, 12 watts.
Tanda yansen bachila yang asuga anjong chega parola yopiga lepadi tanga suga kasula lokle chambuchila taba imbaina kode ane angasuga what jini yochuge na lok sugorwa otina do chi pesho tangde tan kole kachigi yores.
So I think I'm gonna skip a little bit over the myelin for now, but you'll have the slides. But remember that the myelin is important for quickly communicating that electrical signal.
Tanda de la ya petsi kola ya nga su shu de shi men simba tige tanda chetsula ta de nyesho de ma de chetsula tame yo go classroom na sha yo ro chi san taro chi tanda de zo de myelin ge petsi ta petsi ge simba chi go ro te ge zo de kala na ne da de jokpo ta gi chitres.
So that transmission along the axon can go anywhere from 2 miles an hour, which is super slow. So that's like, go ahead, Dawa. Sorry.
Da ko tanda wa dachi satingi nani chumba dwech go wa te ko debo shida dwet na yores isha shana chich kana tele mile ni dwet na te utinda dwet yores.
So that's like a little over 1 kilometer an hour, right? Is that right? My math. I can't remember my conversions. And it goes all the way up to 400 miles an hour. So let's see.
Yeah, 2 miles is 3.2 kilometers.
Yeah.
So 400 is about 600 kilometers per hour. That under the road, they were the cool get such can at the mile in the many kilometers in Swa, and she that in Joba de Roa, who get Joba. The Joba do wake up, such can mile she just what mile she just and that did Tiro Shagro, Tijal has Shagro kilometer, or Tindag and Joko driver is.
It goes all the way up to like 250 kilometers an hour when it's fully myelinated.
That cool, yeah. That is, I think, Talaya, Petsushimba data ko Yabu by Bana, and a kilometer, 6 kilometers just in address.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the action potential next. And this is too much text to cover today. Usually we'll simplify this down later.
They Tadanga Sugi Teshija, the Linjin Nibo Kotesha, is the Degala Simon Bush, which does the Jelanga, so start dizzy in the Shijans.
So oftentimes when I'm actually teaching this, I'll have these slides so that students don't panic and they know that the notes are on the slides. And I'll give my slides to students after class.
Chatain Banachi looked to Suzula de Kola at Takarsure. Alinjiniba Jambi Caps, Shenomachi, the Dusta Chikarsure, data, and listen to the Digala Shasha, yes, and the Treva, Puzula, and the Kutuchi, yes.
So when they're reviewing for the exam, they'll have the information, but I don't need to go through point by point in class.
That was with Jela. Jutola Tarichi Capsu Consulation to the Simban and Zenta Capsim Banachi that the cotton cindy so much in because.
So when we look at this graph, you know, let's break down what we're actually looking at. So here is a neuron with a pipette running down to sample the neuron.
Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
So let's start with this picture. What are we looking at here? We're looking at a neuron with a glass pipette touching it.
Okay, that other day I am also per de la tate caritagoris na once a trazuch latago pache once a trazu de ganla ya and asugi ya karsa shege chike ko gang la on sa thais gang la tukuyo patiris.
The pipette is measuring the difference between the inside of the cell versus the outside of the cell, and specifically the electrical potential.
Danga su dege ko ge de gang la chu cha ju ge de gari che ja go re se na on sa thais de ge na lo tan chlo ge parola ya lo ni ki khepre ka su yo me ten de che ja ge res.
So now let's move to the graph, and this is the membrane potential. So the difference between the inside of the cell versus the outside of the cell.
Da tsujo sala ta nga su de ge tsujo sa ge da thiri de la ta ba im ba na de la ya yonshu sa de gang la kari yo re se na ani chimu gi ni ba che chi de chlo che chi na lo res.
So when you're teaching your students, make sure you go through the axes and orient them to what they're looking at.
Da je la lo ki la thon chen che bi kap se de ge ta chi ti ta jong ti kari men ta te go to de chi gu yo res che ba na ani pu su ge kari chi la ya ta ge yo me gi ni tong gu chu res.
And then here is the time in milliseconds.
Da da ge ko the ti ke gang la kari do ti chu ti cham ba che ti chu ti ani ko millisecond na chu do.
So just to check their knowledge, at 0, when the cell is at 0, what does that mean for the difference between the inside and the outside of the cell?
Da da de kap se wa nga su ge de jong ti ke gang le wa jong ti ke gang le le ko in sa to le ko in sa to ti ga le ko la in si wi kap se ani nga su ge thapong ge chimu ge shita na la de shita ba in ba na gari chung yo res ki gari chung yo res.
So
Ela le ko ya sa to ga le ko de kap se gari chung go res sa shino ni ge chapter de.
샤맥 네급 청고레스
Gari ni ka
렌주그 네버 중구며 샤맥 네급
okay. Yeah, no action potential, 0.
Right. So what does that mean? That means that the cell is in perfect balance, right?
Nero tanda de kapse ko tunyam la yo pa. He's saying over here he says not doing anything, but he says like the potential at rest potential. That is not okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I want to point out next is this is considered the resting potential, but it's not at rest, is it?
Tanda de tenyi to tanda ga de kapsin bana ko tanda thiri ga la ta pa imbana nga sula de do rest potential se na ko geta chami ni ba chura chami ni ba de wo derwa emana ga la le ko imbe kapse chami ni wa changum ndo was.
So the neuron is being pulled out of balance, and then it's that's its normal state is feeling out of balance.
Da tanda de kapsin bana ko ge tunyin yo pe ge ni ba sagor wa tele ne ko torsha ge yo ba de chanles.
So that's just like your life, right? How many of you feel like you're in perfect balance?
Da de su su ge yam ma che da song ge yo les che su imba na su su ma che na ne ta chi ge kar sa gre ta tunyin man ba ro wa chi ta de me pe ge ne tan te imba ma lo ge tena do sor sens.
So but this is important for the cell to fire, because what's going to happen is as the yes votes come in, you can see the membrane potential start to rise.
Da de ko gang la de ta do le bi kap se ne nga su ge chimu ge ni ba ti ya phar ge yo ba tong to wa.
So so these are all the cell is being stimulated by other neurons. So these are like excitatory yes votes.
Da de kap su ko kar re se na the tapon the ones that upon the tapon shank the cook salon chigi is the deck of sim by na and echo ya chagdota will by no you the yes chag re chag.
So I call this a neural democracy.
That they are in by na you want to amount to do yes.
So you have 10,000 connections, and if there are more yeses than no votes, the membrane potential starts to rise.
That they by now go get one side in the Chitondo Chiku Shavache and the Dela moving what they like really becomes Samagi and yes, Lu race at the Utilu and a Marise which may be Chapan Bana and it's moving but the Pargaris.
And once you get to a certain threshold, then remember that the inside of the cell, we'll go over that in a second, is filled with potassium and the outside is sodium.
Go Tamsem what's it helping by now? And Takoya Pargaris that they comes Nalolaya and a potassium Tanchlola, sodium.
The way I remember this is I think salty banana.
That they are some I think Canada something else na Sakutuno gate up banana note something is.
So the salt is on the outside, the sodium on the outside, and bananas are full of potassium. So the bananas on the inside. So that's my trick for remembering it is salty banana.
That they are the tempers and it's a good to you with the banana or something is. Tayanko that's the banana consumer your budget, Nala consumer your budget, then Nalola Yako potential your budget. Ne, that's a good to bananas, they don't dig in it on the top do the reality, yes.
So all the salt wants to get inside, all the sodium wants to come into the cell because it's so far out of balance, as you see here.
That they can say Banako, Tunium Genevala, Mats Tambalaya, Chiloda, you pick it sat, sodium Tikanza, and then Nalola on it.
So with those yes votes, we let a little bit of sodium in, a little bit of sodium in, a little bit of sodium in, and then bang, all the sodium comes in.
Nahandangasuge, that Tinado will look at this what the Tinado look at in the day and the Tampotela, any sodium that work with the no, which you and some Silaya and the Kanza in all like this.
But notice it doesn't stop at 0 when the cell is in perfect balance.
That under the capsules to not you got the race in the Chapongi Chimugi, but the Lecola Chapi capsule, what to him Chapi capsule, Koga, new but the Degimitwa, or the prayer some Shagamitwa, they do not you rest.
Just like life, we overdo things.
Then I sing as Mutina and some language to get the and it's a but the rest.
We don't stop when we're perfectly full. We eat to the point where our stomach is sore.
Color Saba in Manila to co jars, better such a digmatis, better shoes such a to none of the sides.
So notice how quickly this is happening. This is in a tiny little millisecond.
That they got to not cheer the caress and Katsun Jopu Jungu, but so good is what they custom as a military chagan on it, Tambuchan was.
So this process can't just stop immediately when it's perfectly balanced. It overshoots.
That under the Capsuco Incarcerate, Tunin Yopaliti, Gale, Ratane, Yachimal, Pain Jopu.
Now, the inside of the cell is full of both sodium and potassium. So it's super crowded inside the cell.
That happened now, ya cooker chigores and sodium to potassium and Nicha, Sankaja, they don't go not only shoot Sankat.
And now we're out of balance in the other direction.
That take up Sia and Atsulaya Chiga. That cho gender, take it or shock Jolaya, Tunya mind beginning but Pelagiris.
So now all the sodium channels close and the potassium channels open. So what do they think is going to happen to the potassium now?
Ta tanda de ne kap de la ya sodium ge jilam te ko kha jap chi de te potassium ge jilam te kha chi ge yo is tambala ya ni che su tina potassium la karin jong sa res.
So have them tell me what they think happens to the potassium.
Da che
Hopefully
su
this is a review.
potassium la ya kari chomen de shi jaro che sa. Ya chi ge lan jaro che.
Kude.
Kudo.
Potassium chiloma drugres.
Potassium will go out of the cell.
Perfect, exactly right. So it gets super crowded inside. And then again, as the potassium leaves, notice it doesn't stop at 0 where it's balanced.
Da de ka simbana res tanala sangha test tambale potassium de chlo thandu res thoim bana dini yo ko chlo thom ka sa anta ko tunyam yo pikasa le ko la ya de mi do ka te to no chis.
Again, it's happening so quickly, it overshoots all the way down to even worse than even more out of balance than it was during its quote unquote resting state.
Ta tanda de ko peten jo ko shu chirwa ne ta mar do so ko de ga ta bana mar do de ta ne nga su ge ta bai bana tanda chami nyu ba yo chami tu nyu ba le chal ge bi ga ma u chal dus.
So at this point here, where is the sodium and where is the potassium? First.
Ta tanda ge gela ge ta ta ja sa chi do ta ni ge dang ter wa ti ge ni ka te la ya ani ta thapung ko shana ni ke she bai bana sodium ka yo res potassium ka yo res.
Tukse gabi nanglo de peze kedo de shila yores. Peze kedo de shila yore, tukse gabi kedo de nanglo yores, shame ne kapsu.
Tanda te potassium chilo la yo wa.
Mar sodium shilo potassium nalo lasa.
Okay. But I knew the capsule by now. They said sodium is outside and the potassium is inside.
Yeah.
The
sodium is inside and the potassium is outside. The salty banana has reversed.
Tanda de kasu ngasu tangi banana sakudu jusai do ati go lo sayures wa. Ani tanda de kapse ani ko sodium de knowledge potassium de chilo la yures. Drug sate gelege they're talking about at the resting potential. You didn't ask because you are just pointing at number 2. Tanda gelege drug sate ani gante la ya mombu tachwa ti nikapila kari yures na mashi resting potential kas kari yures drug tamasa.
Yeah, so it's way out of balance, but we have to reset back to the resting potential. So the sodium starts out outside and then it rushes in, and the potassium, when it's too full, rushes out.
Ane tambote la ya sodium de ane ko ro chlo ne nalo yang budwa ne nalo sangka le stambala ya ne potassium te yang chlo tan ru res.
And then we have to switch it back, and we use let's see, let me skip to this. We use the sodium potassium pumps to switch everything back.
Anda tanda de kapsa nga suge sodium to potassium ke ti oro punda chi wor ti peshe tang de te ne nalo la yu pe ne tang te ne ju ja ku yo res.
So that helps to reset the cell.
Anda te ke kar chi gre se na nga suge thapon te yang che ani chame gi ni bala ne chi res.
Back to this state. So we eventually get back to this resting state.
that the associated Tamatela and the Jameni Wigini Bablaya Lebris.
But again, it's not really resting. It's pulled way out of balance.
And then they capsule as to Jameni was Saguri, Jameni Watayana, and Yesugini was Saguri or Taimana. Tom Yusung Muning, Yesudan Jametina Maris for Kogi, Tunyamti, Tanoi by nature.
So the cell always wants to be in balance here.
That happened the Katim by Tunyam Deni to the Tunya, they sat on the lake for your
but it hardly spends any time in balance. Most of the time, it's working hard.
Going by now for Musta by Tunyam in the Battle Dag, Hatchon Yonoris, Katim by night. It's a pet you are like
And it's out of balance, just like you all are here very late at night working hard.
That go Tunyam Ganiwati Chodis, the Kangeta Songo is not Chetu to Songa Chetu Bana, Homobet Chuch higher in Delaya, touching the Janji they take or Shujak day or what Titan Songres.
So at least it's comforting to know that every neuron in your head is built to do that.
That Tini Dachi, Hakuyachi, Dachi Career is an Amatsuge, Lepinona Yopigi Wansa, that's how my gear, Netandeli Katichit Kures.
So what I've just described to you is an excitatory message. So remember, that's opening up the sodium channels, right? And that leads to excitation. So in our example here, we have two excitatory messages coming in. So A and B are exciting the cell. But C might have the opposite effect. So that might be an inhibitory message or a no vote. So when you have an inhibitory vote, what do they think happens to the resting state of the cell? So when inhibitory votes come in, what happens to the membrane potential? Does it go up or does it go down?
Hello, I think the membrane will reduce.
Perfect, Cheyenne. Yeah, exactly. So the membrane potential is going to go down. So that means you need more yes votes to get it above that threshold. Yeah, so that's the difference between these yes votes and no votes, and you see how these ions of sodium and potassium and other ones that we haven't talked about are super important for the cell's function.
뜻단다 제스 통요 스피셜 나가 속에 아니 다 소디움 또 버르신 셔요와 어때다 때문에 야 신당가 속에 뭐좀 맞지와 같이 요레스 데다게 네 원사기 지리 같이 당텔라야 네 지리 가는 거 매치서 또 요레스.
So, how many of you have ever had muscle cramps?
한다 제출라야 가서 때 muscle cramps system발라야 가서 자 취해지도와 로 감바다 라바간에 자 취해지도와 어디 종용주 가서 이래서.
So you might wonder why that happens, and it's related to what we just talked about.
다때 제출 자 취해지고로 지금 자 취해서는 얘다 샤름 되고 잡고 쳐댔던 무슨 샤시도와 어디 거래 임반에 준생거래 치는 임반나 세티 텐싱그레스 세티 임반나 대단한 거랑 같은 데 시지자서 되게 딜랐다는 정도です.
So what do they think happens when you sweat a lot, when you're working hard physically? What do they think is happening?
다 제출지 루체로체 뭐라 쉬었던 거 주스탄 발라야 제런 게 삼슬라야 가르쳐 거여서 됐어. 랜선로나 저트릭 되샤.
표시 작은 나올 엑시포레이션 가드 메죠. 세세이다.
I guess there's no action potential firing.
Yeah, you get all the ions that you sweat out become imbalanced. So we drink things like Gatorade, but here is an example where this is my son James, and I make him drink pickle juice when he cramps a lot.
Yes, that and that the action for some of us go the younger is Kachla Vananga Sumoroton Stambalaya, Mura Konyamte Chidu Mapuchlo Tongo, but the latent dating as Suzuku Nangeta, go a Traponteta, Tagasuchi, do you mind being never Chuchumchilla at the rest? That is Tambal the Domayo Chitung as to the Gatorade Sag and the energy drink in the Dua, what is the new Chiagi Toyat in the Dua, what's the Tongo is that the young the Pugian Chekolaya. Ne kampa kita cing ngasu nyan jundu ya tahu tenda do yang gor wata masuk cramps ne tigri tu kor kola tenda do chance tambah lagi ni adalah tenda pickle juice ge ani ciu kuat itu yes.
So it happens that pickle juice has a lot of salt and a lot of vinegar in it. So it has a lot of electrolytes that help you kind of rebalance and recharge the muscles and nerves.
The cups in by night and the pickle juice you could dig an ally, and a cool lot chair get to sit in that and a tin ally that you carcerate a cheat or what it on and the vinegar so I should tell you rest this number like taking a Suzukolaya, Nako new carcerate the link Nivasagorata, Chimuni what it at Tonyum Zualaya, and it Tom Zualaya Panguris.
But I also like to tease him because he makes such a funny face when he has to drink it.
That day, Chibate Kolaya, near Kunyanto on Scotch, like one day, Chumutu, son, water, very good, like what it's on Stambalaya, and could don't pandam Kansas, thank to us, things Stambalaya, and Kolaya, near Quach, and could it too much yes.
So again, this is just kind of to help you connect the micro and the macro, and you see like why would we drink something like pickle juice for cramps? How does it actually work? And now you have a better understanding.
That the manager so Carsabreta, Kuchon Vigi Neta, Che Vigi Nig Parog, Tioti, Chitoyagi Pisuntina, instead of the Casimbana, Nasukari Gioresena, such a Chigita, Nanjira Shuro, the do Chombi, Capsut and the Gita, Toya, pickle juice to Chitoyagi. Or what they at the time that she's so young for talking such a video, yes.
So I want them to think about what kinds of things they do when they have muscle cramps, like what kinds of things do they take? And most likely it has lots of things like salt and, you know, other ions in it.
That's so children by nature such what do jump at such a two carriage is right. Children that want to get that on the side, they come so much shinang like Satan, need to do Mambo, you pick it on this.
So I think for time, I'm going to skip over. We're end at 12:30, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, yeah. I think I'm going to skip skip this particular section just for time, because I want to make sure we get to kind of the philosophy part of it, because I think that'll be more interesting. But they'll have these slides to look through. These are just, you know, hopefully refreshers.
That dig some down the and it do shaggy 2 years or Nishula, Chinisula Chiga, and Sudan and Chitin Jag in the content of Chagres, the dig jail and so that to be Chashi or Tema Chig yes.
저 춘주지 단 디그레티 바로 나 도와실래스 본다.
Can I ask someone saying, can I ask you a small question?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
딩에 저와디 단다게 짠 주세디 카디든 잡아다시라시 nga 샤지 제디 짠에 간주 수분은 컵지 격다게
네.
surgery 제디 짠에 nga last year I got the hernia surgery the longaman nga hernia surgery 제라 the cause ngal 컵지 컵디 제디 짠에 가리 연구도 있으나 수분 놀로게 the 나주도 조금이 들어와 you know pressure 내슈도 조금 cause me the 라바가 내 간가 조금 얘네야 디 나주도 지금 또에도 조금 들어와 디코 작은